Hi, today I'm going to talk about some books about sickness and care. All of the books that I'm going to talk about were in my best books of 2018 video, but I didn't talk about them in depth or anything. I think I might like this to be a series because I read quite a few books about sickness, and as a sick person I'm always like searching for things that reflect or fictionalize my experience of being disabled, but also like being embodied in a sick body, as well as just a body in general, which is hell anyway. The first book I want to talk about is Metabolize If Able by Clay Add, which I have already talked about on this channel because I made a reading vlog, which I've now mentioned in like 3 videos. This book is like a hybrid novel about clones and their spawn. It's set in a like sci-fi dystopia future. It follows a bunch of clones who are created by corporations and then pathologized and like treated by doctors or like corp doctors. The clones are like repressed, they can't really express themselves, they're not allowed to reproduce, so it's also about resistance. It's also about hope and collective struggle and intimacy. That's one of the reasons why I liked it. I found it to be very comforting and beautiful for me to read as like a sick person. There's a little bit in the book which is this diagram of wellness plans, ones that are really like holistic and supportive rather than just based on control and restriction. If you like this, then I would suggest reading the next book, which is in a totally different genre, but I think has a lot to say about collective care and support and also magic, and that's A Hatful of Sky by Terry Pratchett. This is the second book in the Tiffany Aching series, which is set in Discworld as well, but it's a more like children's slash young adult. People call it young adult, but I really don't think it's young adult. I think it's more like a children's book. The novel just follows on from The Wee Freeman, which is the first book, and it's more about Tiffany coming into her power and learning more about herself and witchcraft, and so she goes and works with Miss Level, a witch who works in just this like small village and who supports people. And I think, yeah, it's just this great example of community care and the ways in which magic is simply a kind of attending. I guess like sickness is in this novel more as an aside, as like a companion to care, which is the foremost thing. I don't really think I can talk about sickness without talking about care, which is why I wanted to include it, because one of the wonderful things about sickness is that it means that you need care, and when you get that care, that's really lovely and beautiful. Another aspect of A Hatful of Sky though is harm and sort of like harming people and like, angry at people needing care. So with that thread, this links through to this next book, which is The Water Cure by Sophie Mackintosh. This book is basically about 3 sisters who are on an island created by King, their father, and their mother, and they know that if they leave the island they will be harmed because women are weak and need to be protected from the harm of men. At the very beginning of the novel, their father disappears, and it's about what that all leads to. It's a great novel also about pain and embodiment. They practice these sort of like ritual ceremonies, some of which include like self-harming behaviours. It's a very intense book, and there isn't a kind of like specific sickness, it's just this pervasive sense of like weakness, which I think links very nicely onto the next book I'm going to talk about, Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Machado, which is a short story collection. One of the things that The Water Cure in this really link well with is the way that like embodiment as a woman becomes a kind of weird relationship where you have this like voyeuristic sense of viewing your own pain, which I think is very accurate to like how a lot of women live. These short stories are tender and sinister. They cover like a wide range of things, but most of them centre on bodies and trauma and women. It's a mashup of different genres like fabulism, magical realism, science fiction. When I was reading The Water Cure I felt like I was reading a book about my body, and that's definitely the same for some of these stories. There's one novella in this called Especially Heinous, which is Law and Order Special Victims Unit. I literally don't watch those shows, but basically it takes the title of those shows and those seasons and it tells a story via the episode synopses, and it's this amazing haunting story of these girls with bells for eyes and just wild and intricate horrors that are also somehow so compelling and sweet to read. If you are triggered by sexual violence, then this is a book to treat with care because it has a lot of threads of those things running through it, and both explicitly and implicitly. There's another story that's quite a longer story called The Resident in here, and I found an email where I was writing a bit about this book, and I think specifically about how I felt about The Resident, so I'm going to read some of that now. I loved the sickness and the ghosts and the distraction and the pain and the power of it all. I do really want to read a story where that kind of lingering uneasy sickness, a state I regularly feel, is represented not to be somewhat creepy or suggested of negative / frightening stuff, but instead a space of home or care even. I love reading about sickness and sickness as a space of fear, but I also am sick and I don't live my life in fear even when I am worried about my health, although obviously sometimes I am fearful. But sickness is a comfort in a way. The sickness is present in my life. It's dependable and solid, fluid, yes, weird, yes, confusing, yes, but here with me now. I am sick and I am accompanied by sickness, and sometimes that's really not too bad. Sickness can give you so much space and so much muchness, so much aliveness. Like, that's not really a critique of this book, it's just a general note about the wider feeling I have about reading, I guess, literary fiction that includes sickness. From this book to the next book, I think that the next book does hold some of the feelings that I was talking about, sickness being a friend, an accompaniment to you. And that book is On Hell by Johanna Hedva. I'm going to struggle to talk about this book because I find it very difficult to do. It's a very experimental and fragmented novel, but it definitely does cover sickness as familiar in a way. I'm going to link in the description box a interview I read with the author, which really helped me like understand what they were trying to do. On Hell basically follows somebody who was previously incarcerated. It's very focused on his body and the way he's like hacked his body, as well as hacked like United States security infrastructure, which is why he was in prison for doing. It's recorded in interviews and then like in, I guess, diary entries. There's this sort of like unnamed interviewer who's part of the story. I think it's very difficult and weird, and I'm still not really sure about it, but I think it's worth investing some time in if you're prepared to grapple with some very intense body hacking stuff. But from one thing that has biohacking and body horror to another that has those things too. This is Virus by Linda Stupart. And this book is another book that's kind of difficult to talk about. It's interesting because the description of the book is much more a list of things that you will find in this book, which is not really a synopsis, but obviously it could be helpful. This is about a virus and how it affects the world, specifically how it affects like people in the art world, I would say. It's a lot about male violence and horrible, terrible men dying from this virus. It's kind of like a biological revenge story in a way, and it's told as well in fragmentary stuff. So this is sort of like more of a script, and then there's like drawings throughout. There's also some stuff about mothering in here that I really enjoyed. It's just a sort of like weird journey through the life of this virus, I guess. I'll read some of the other things that are in this book according to the synopsis though. The violent deaths of male genius artists, philosophers and theorists, zombies, sirens, rampant plagiarism, cop killing, spells you can use at home. Those are the things I've been talking about, and I hope that if you're looking for a book about sickness, you might find some comfort or some love or some care or some relatability in the weird horror of it all in these books. If you have any suggestions or ones that you think are like these, then I would really love to hear about them in the comments below. I got tagged by Ferga in a video, so I'm going to tag Ferga in a video now. I know that's not how it works, but so I'm going to tag Ferga to make a video about her favourite books or films about sickness. Okay, bye.